Welcome back to the Deep Dive. I love it when our listeners send in such interesting sources, and today we're really diving deep into how to make more time for learning.
Always a popular topic.
Right. It really is. Everyone wants to learn more, but who actually has the time?
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
you sent in a bunch of stuff on this and an essay on time management for lifelong learners, some personal reflections on your own experience with time, and even a historical analysis of timekeeping. It's
Wow.
going to be fascinating. So let's get started with that essay, Time Management for Lifelong Learners. It really lays out the problem well. To make time for learning, we need to spare time, make time, and use time reasonably.
Yeah, I like that.
Such a practical approach.
Yeah, it reminds us that we actually have more control over our time than we think.
Totally. Like, we're not just victims of time, right? We can actually, shape how we experience it and use it.
For sure.
So let's talk about some of those sparing time tactics they outlined. Like, what if we started scheduling learning like it was an important appointment?
Mm,
Simple, but powerful shift in mindset, don't you think?
absolutely.
And then there's being mindful of all those digital distractions, like they suck up so much of our time these days.
Oh, yeah.
Endless social media scrolling, constantly checking
Oh,
email.
it's like modern day time theft. You think you're just taking a quick break and then suddenly, like, hours have gone by.
I know. Scary how easily that happens.
It is.
And then we could be spending that time, learning.
Right, exactly.
Much more enriching, right?
Yeah.
And the essay also talks about saying no to unnecessary commitments.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Oh, it's so hard.
It is.
But it's key to reclaiming our time, isn't it?
It is. Learning requires focus and dedication. I mean, to really dive into a subject, you
Hmm.
need to create space for it and protect that time.
Now that you mentioned diving deep, I was looking at those personal notes you sent. Experienceoftime.txt.
Hmm.
You said something really interesting in there about how our perception of time changes depending on what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned how time flies when you're doing something you enjoy, but it drags on forever when you're bored.
Oh, for sure.
And that ties in with what we were just saying about sparing time,
Eh.
right?
Yeah.
Because if we can make learning fun, it won't feel like a chore.
Right. Exactly.
You won't feel like you're sacrificing time for it.
It's more like it's about turning learning into something pleasurable instead of a burden.
Exactly. And we've all had those moments where we get so absorbed in something that we lose track of time. Like, I do that with a good book all the time.
Oh, me too.
So imagine, harnessing that for learning, right?
Yeah.
If you're curious and fascinated by what you're learning, those minutes won't feel so precious.
And there's actually a scientific basis for that, you know? Yeah, like studies have shown that when we're engaged, our brains release dopamine, which makes us feel good and
Yeah.
also enhances our focus and memory.
It's like a win-win, right?
Yep.
We learn more effectively and it feels good.
Exactly.
But then we have to factor in age, too. Like, your document, Learning and Time at Different Ages, really highlights how our needs and perceptions change throughout our lives.
It does. And it's so important to realize that effective time management for learning, it isn't one size fits all.
Right.
What works for a kid who's like soaking up knowledge like a sponge is probably not going to work for a busy professional juggling a million things.
Totally different life stages, totally different needs. But you know what I found mind-blowing?
What's that?
Your historical analysis, timeandhistory.txt, how did people even think about time before clocks?
Right. It's hard to even imagine.
It is.
But that's what makes it so fascinating. Like before clocks, time was experienced so differently. It was tied to natural rhythms, the sun rising and setting, the seasons changing, the phases of the moon.
Wow, so instead of a linear progression like we think of it now, it was more cyclical.
Exactly. It was a constantly revolving circle. And with that cyclical perception of time, there was less emphasis on like individual achievement and more on communal experience, the interconnectedness of all things.
Yeah, and it's almost like the clock, with its tick-tock, it kind of imposed this sense of linearity on us.
Hmm, interesting.
Yeah, it became something to be measured and divided and controlled.
Like a commodity almost.
Exactly. And that had a huge impact, especially during the Industrial Revolution.
Yes, the Industrial Revolution. Time literally became money, right?
Exactly. Workers were paid by the hour, factories ran on strict schedules, and the focus shifted from, craftsmanship to efficiency and productivity.
Wow, so the clock became like this symbol of progress and control, but also led to this feeling of scarcity. Like we're always running out of time.
Exactly.
And doesn't that bring us right back to today? I mean, we always feel like there's just not enough time, especially for things like learning.
That's right. But, looking back at these sources, we've actually, uncovered some practical advice for reclaiming our time and making learning a bigger part of our lives.
We have. It starts with being mindful of how we're spending our time right now.
Right. Are we wasting it on things that don't really matter? Or are we investing it in, things that nourish us?
It's a good question to ask ourselves.
And the essay had some great tips on making that choice. Remember, it talked about prioritizing learning, even in small chunks.
Oh, yeah.
They called it micro-learning, if I'm saying that right.
Yeah, microlearning. It's a great way to fit learning into a busy schedule.
Because you don't need big blocks of time to engage with new ideas, right?
Not at all. Even 5 or 10 minutes here and there, it can really make a difference.
So instead of being overwhelmed by, having to dedicate hours to studying, you can just break it down.
Right, exactly.
Like listen to a podcast on your commute, or read an article while you're waiting for something, or watch a short video during your lunch break, something like that.
Those little pockets of time we usually waste, we can use them.
Exactly. And technology can even be helpful with that.
Oh, for sure.
There are so many apps and resources out there that make it easy to, learn on the go.
Yeah, it's not about getting rid of technology completely. It's about using it in a way that supports our learning.
So true. Now, the essay also highlighted creating a space and routine for learning.
Oh, that's a good one.
Having a spot where you can really focus without distractions can make a huge difference.
Huge. It sends a signal to your brain that this is time for serious learning, like time for really absorbing new information and making connections.
So like a cozy corner with a comfy chair, good lighting, maybe a do not disturb sign on the door.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be fancy, but it should be a space where you feel comfortable and can focus. And a routine helps make it a habit.
Yeah, like maybe you read every morning before everyone else gets up, or block off an hour each evening for online learning, whatever works for you.
Yeah, having that structure makes it less tempting to procrastinate.
I like that. And speaking of finding what works for you, the essay also talked about self-directed learning,
Oh, yeah.
like choosing what we learn based on what we're interested in.
Exactly. Self-directed learning puts you in control.
Right. You get to identify your passions and what you're curious about, and then find resources that fit those interests.
Whether it's history, language learning, astrophysics, the possibilities are endless.
And that takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
Right. You don't feel like you have to learn something because it's practical.
Right.
You can just follow your own intellectual curiosity.
Yeah.
And as we were saying earlier, when we're actually interested in what we're learning, we're more likely to stick with it
Oh, absolutely.
and, actually learn something.
Passion fuels learning.
It really does.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a solitary pursuit either. The essay also talked about connecting with other learners.
Oh, yeah, did it? I forgot about that.
It did. And that really stood out to me because I find that sharing my learning journey with others makes it so much more rewarding. Like joining a book club, taking a class, even just having conversations with friends about things that I'm excited about.
I completely agree. Having a community is so important. It can really make a difference. It gives you that support and encouragement, and, it keeps you accountable.
Yeah. And you get exposed to different perspectives and ideas that you might not have thought of on your own.
For sure. It's like creating our own little learning ecosystem.
I love that. Drawing inspiration from each other, sharing what we discover, and just keeping each other motivated along the way.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that managing time for learning, well, it changes at different stages of life.
Oh, that's so true.
What works for a college student won't necessarily work for a working parent who's got a million things going on.
Right. Like life is always changing, so our approach to learning has to change too.
It does.
So be flexible, adapt those strategies, and don't be afraid to try new things and see what works best at each stage.
Exactly. There's no one right way to do this. It's about finding what works for you, what fits your life, and what you enjoy.
This has been such a great conversation. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on time and learning.
I'm glad.
And I really like that idea of like shifting our mindset from seeing time as the enemy to seeing it as an ally in learning and growth.
Yeah, that's really the key takeaway here.
It's not about finding more hours in the day, right?
Huh.
It's about being deliberate with how we spend the time that we do have.
Exactly. And recognizing that learning is an investment in ourselves, one that really benefits us throughout our lives.
So well said. Thank you so much for being here today and sharing your expertise. This was a really fascinating deep dive.
It really was. Thank you.
And a huge thank you to you, our listener, for sending in these thought-provoking sources.
Yeah, great stuff.
Okay, so as a final thought to leave you with, I want you to think about your relationship with time. Do you see it as this finite resource that's constantly slipping away?
Mm.
Or could you think of it as like this vast landscape full of opportunities for learning and discovery?
That's a great way to think about it because time is a lot like learning. It's what we make of it.
Exactly. If we approach time intentionally and with a sense of curiosity, it opens up so many possibilities for lifelong learning.
It really does.
So thanks again for joining us on the Deep Dive. Keep learning, keep exploring, and remember that the journey of learning lasts a lifetime. We'll see you next time.